You know how family reunions are supposed to be fun? A chance to catch up with people you haven't seen in years? Well, this one was anything but that. A lot of awkward small talk, a few too many drinks, and my cousin Larry getting into it with Uncle Ray about some nonsense. It was just one of those nights where the whole thing was a ticking time bomb, and I wanted out. The second I could make an excuse to leave, I was gone. My GPS had other plans, though. Instead of sticking me on the main highway, it sent me on this back road shortcut through the hills of Kentucky. I figured it would shave off a few minutes, and I wasn't in the mood to argue with technology. I should have turned back when I saw that first turnoff, just a dirt road winding through pitch-black woods. But no, I wanted to get home so bad I figured, why not? The further I drove, the more I regretted it. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for my car, and it twisted through the hills like a snake, winding and dipping, with nothing but thick trees and dense underbrush on either side. The GPS signal kept dropping in and out, but I just kept following the line on the screen. There were no streetlights out here, no houses, nothing. It was like driving into another world, a world where I was the only person around for miles. And it was creepy. No other word for it. The road had that heavy, oppressive kind of silence, like even the wind didn't want to blow through these parts. Every once in a while, I'd catch something out of the corner of my eye, just a shadow, or maybe the way the moonlight flickered through the trees, but it was enough to put me on edge. There was this sinking feeling in my gut, telling me something wasn't right. I kept checking the time, counting the minutes until I'd hit the main road again, when suddenly it happened. I was coming around this sharp bend when a massive buck exploded out of the woods right in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching as I jerked the wheel to avoid it. My car skidded, barely missing the deer, but then, out of the same patch of trees, something else came crashing out. At first, I thought it was a bear, but no. It was too tall, too lean, and moving on two legs. It was a massive creature, its body covered in dark, matted fur. A long snout like a wolf's snapped open, revealing rows of jagged teeth. But this thing wasn't a wolf. It wasn't even a dog, not really. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen, its yellow eyes glowing in the reflection of my headlights. I don't know what possessed me to stay there, frozen. But for a moment, we just stared at each other. The buck darted off into the trees, and that's when I realized I'd interrupted a hunt. The creature wasn't chasing me. Not yet, anyway. It had been after the deer. But now its attention was on me. It was like some primal instinct snapped in its mind. I floored it. The car lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel, but the Dogman, yeah, that's what I'm calling it now, was fast. Too fast. I could hear it, feel it, closing the distance behind me. I checked the rearview mirror, and sure enough, it was running right behind my car, those glowing eyes locked on me like I was next on the menu. My heart was racing. I couldn't think straight. I was just driving, trying to outrun this nightmare. But then, just as I thought I was putting distance between us, I felt it. The car jolted. My tires hit something, maybe a rock or a root, and suddenly, I was stuck. I hit the gas, but the wheels just spun, kicking up dirt and gravel. I glanced in the mirror. The Dogman was almost on me. Its claws scraped the back of the car, a screeching sound like nails on a chalkboard, and I swear I could feel its breath, hot and rancid, against the windows. I hit the gas again, harder, and just as the Dogman lunged at the car, those claws outstretched, teeth bared, the tires caught. The car shot forward, and the Dogman's hand slammed against the back window. The force cracked the glass, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove like a madman, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sound of my engine. Every curve, every bend in the road, I expected to see those glowing eyes in my rearview mirror. But then, through the trees, I saw it. A farmhouse. Lights were on in the windows, flickering like a beacon in the middle of nowhere. I didn't slow down until I pulled into the driveway, my car bouncing over the uneven ground. I jumped out and ran toward the house, my legs shaking so bad I could barely keep my balance. Behind me, I heard a deep, throaty growl, like something was angry I had escaped. I looked back, and sure enough, the Dogman stood at the edge of the woods, pacing. It wouldn't cross onto the property. I didn't know why, but it was like an invisible barrier kept it out. Still, it didn't leave. It just stood there, watching me with those awful yellow eyes. Then it let out a scream. It was like a wolf's cry, but deeper, with this guttural bass to it, almost like something was choking out the sound, the kind of sound that shakes you to your core and makes your blood run cold. I banged on the door like a madman, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It felt like an eternity before it opened, and standing there was a tall, grizzled man holding a double-barrel shotgun, his eyes narrowing as he looked me up and down. His wife stood behind him, a revolver clutched in her hand. "What in God's name are you banging on our door for this time of night?" the man growled, his voice rough like gravel. I barely got the words out, my voice shaky. I almost hit something on the road. It's after me. Please, you've got to help me." The man's expression didn't change, but he stepped aside, motioning me inside. "Get in." I stumbled into the house, glancing back toward the yard. The Dogman was still there. I could see its glowing eyes watching me from the dark cover of the forest that edged the property. The man, who introduced himself as Randall, slammed the door shut, locking it with a heavy bolt. His wife, Abby, kept the revolver trained on the door, her knuckles white around the handle. I could tell this wasn't the first time they'd dealt with something like this. I explained what had happened, how I'd interrupted its hunt, how it had chased me, and how I barely made it here alive. Randall listened quietly, nodding as if it all made perfect sense. Then he exchanged a glance with his wife before speaking. "You ain't the first to come running here, boy. That thing, Dogman we call it, it's been around these parts for generations. Long before my time and before my father's time, too. It hunts these woods, and it don't take kindly to anyone messing up its business." He sat down, the shotgun resting across his knees. "Thing is, it won't cross onto our land. Never has, never will." "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Randall's eyes darkened and Abby tightened her grip on the revolver. "A long time ago we made a deal, a bloody one. My family's paid the price over the years. Brothers, cousins, lost them all to that thing. But this land, it's sacred. As long as we stay on it, it can't touch us." The room felt like it was closing in, the weight of their words settling over me like a suffocating blanket. I didn't ask what the price was. I didn't want to know. They let me stay the night, offered me a couch by the fire, but sleep didn't come easy. Outside, I could hear the Dogman's growls, low and menacing. I kept thinking about how close I'd come to death, about how that thing had singled me out. It wasn't just a mindless animal. It was something more. Something with a grudge. Morning came too slowly, but with the first light of dawn, the Dogman was gone. Randall handed me a cup of coffee and nodded toward the door. "Best you be on your way, son. It don't hunt during the day, but you never know." I thanked them, Randall and Abby, profusely. They'd saved my life, no question about it. As I got into my car, which looked like I had driven it through Jurassic Park, I glanced back at the farmhouse one last time. They stood on the porch, watching me, their guns still in hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd done this before, many times, and that they'd do it again. As I drove away, I made a vow to myself. I'd never take that road again. Hell, I'd never drive through Kentucky again if I could help it. And I'd never tell anyone, not anyone who knew me, about what I saw that night. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. There are things out there, things that don't belong in this world. One of those things is Dogman. I know it's still out there, waiting for the next time. I pray never to experience anything like that as long as I live. May God have mercy on the next poor soul that gets in his way.
It was the five of us. Leah, Jess, Brian, and me had been friends since college, bound by the kind of memories that make you think nothing could ever go wrong when you're together. So when Brian suggested we go camping in the Upper Peninsula, near the Hiawatha National Forest, it seemed like a perfect idea, a chance to disconnect, reset, and laugh about old times. None of us were seasoned campers, but Brian had grown up in the area, and he assured us he knew the best spot. Remote, quiet, right next to a crystal clear lake. We trusted him. How could we not? Brian was the one who always kept things together, the rock of our group. If he said it was safe, then it was safe. The first day was perfect. We hiked through the woods, laughing at the stories we swapped. The air was cool, the sky a vivid blue, and the scent of pine hung heavy in the air. The kind of smell that made you feel like the world was pure again, untouched by the chaos of civilization. We reached our campsite by late afternoon, a small clearing by the lake, with a perfect view of the water reflecting the fiery colors of the setting sun. By nightfall, we had a roaring fire going, and the light danced off the surface of the lake, casting long shadows into the woods. The darkness crept in around us, but it felt more like a blanket than a threat. It was the kind of night where everything seemed right in the world. Jess passed around a flask of whiskey, and we toasted to our friendship, our past, and the days ahead. We were all a little buzzed, our conversations loosening as we sank deeper into our camping chairs. The crackling fire, the only sound besides our voices, and the occasional splash of a fish in the lake. It was just past midnight when we heard it. At first, it was just a low rustle in the woods behind us. No one paid much attention. Probably a deer or a raccoon, maybe even a stray gust of wind. But then it came again, louder this time, like something much larger was moving through the trees. Ethan, always the jokester, grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the woods. "Come on out, Bigfoot," he called, laughing. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but branches and shadows. But the sound didn't stop. If anything, it got closer, heavier, like whatever was out there wasn't afraid of us, or our fire. Leah leaned forward, her face half lit by the flames. "What do you think it is?" "Probably a bear," Brian said, though his voice lacked the usual confidence. He stood up, grabbing a thick branch he'd used earlier to stoke the fire. "But it's probably more scared of us than we are of it. Just make some noise, and it'll leave us alone." But as we all got to our feet, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, something shifted in the air. The usual background noise of the forest, the crickets, the wind in the trees, had gone silent, leaving a thick, oppressive quiet that made my skin crawl. And then we saw them, eyes glowing in the darkness. At first, I thought it was just the light of the fire reflecting off an animal's eyes. But there was something wrong about the way they moved. Too fast, too smooth. There were several pairs just beyond the tree line, watching us. And then slowly the eyes rose, higher and higher, until they were at least 6 feet off the ground. Ethan's laughter died in his throat. "What the hell?" Brian stepped forward, raising the branch like a club. "Who's out there?" he called, his voice steady but strained. For a moment, nothing happened. The eyes just stared at us, unblinking, glowing a strange, malevolent yellow. And then they moved. Quick, darting motions that sent shadows racing across the clearing. Whatever they were, there were more than one. I counted 3 sets of eyes, maybe 4, all shifting in the darkness. Leah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Those aren't animals," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, one of them stepped into the light. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a body covered in thick, dark fur. But it was the face that sent a jolt of terror through me. It was like a wolf, but distorted, elongated, with a snout full of jagged teeth and eyes that burned with a cold, calculating intelligence. It stood on two legs, its shoulders hunched, and its long arms dangled down like those of a gorilla. "What the hell is that?" Jess gasped, taking a step back. Brian held his ground, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "We need to leave. Now!" But the creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching us, its head tilting slightly as if it were studying us, weighing its options. And then, as if to answer Brian's command, more of them emerged from the woods, forming a loose circle around our camp. There were 5 of them, maybe more, their bodies blending into the shadows, but their eyes, those eyes were everywhere. Leah was shaking beside me, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." Ethan, for once, was silent, his flashlight now aimed at the ground, as if he couldn't bear to look at them anymore. Jess had tears in her eyes, and I realized that I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Brian finally dropped the branch, his voice barely a whisper. "We're not going to make it to the car." He was right. The car was at least a half-mile hike through the woods. Even if we ran, these things were faster, stronger, and they were playing with us, letting the fear build before they made their move. Then, without warning, one of them snarled, a deep, guttural sound that made the ground seem to tremble beneath our feet. It lunged forward, stopping just short of the fire, as if testing the heat. The others followed suit, moving in closer, their eyes gleaming with a hunger that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We were surrounded. There was no escape. For a brief moment, I thought about making a break for it, running into the woods, hoping that maybe, just maybe, one of us could make it out alive. But as soon as the thought entered my mind, one of the creatures stepped closer, its eyes locking onto mine. It knew. It knew exactly what I was thinking, and it wanted me to try. It wanted to chase me down, to toy with me before it tore me apart. I stayed frozen in place, paralyzed by the realization that these things were more than just animals. They were something else, something intelligent, and they were enjoying this. Just when I thought it was over, when I could feel the heat of the creature's breath on my skin, a loud crack echoed through the clearing. The creature recoiled, snarling, and I realized Brian had thrown one of the burning logs at it. The others hesitated, their eyes narrowing as if they were reassessing the situation. Brian didn't wait for them to decide. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing another log and hurling it at the nearest creature. The 5 of us bolted, sprinting toward the woods, the underbrush tearing at our legs as we stumbled through the darkness. The only sounds were our ragged breaths and the pounding of our feet on the forest floor. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The fear of what I might see was worse than the unknown. We ran for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. The creatures didn't chase us, or if they did, they were silent about it. But their presence lingered in the back of my mind, a constant weight pressing down on my chest. Even as we reached the car and Brian fumbled with the keys, my heart didn't stop racing. When we finally peeled out of the campsite and hit the main road, none of us spoke. The silence in the car was thick with disbelief, with the understanding that whatever those things were, they had let us go. This time. As the miles passed and the morning sun began to rise, I finally allowed myself to breathe again. But the image of those glowing eyes, of those towering figures lurking just beyond the firelight, would never leave me. We never talked about what happened that night. Not really. We went our separate ways, trying to forget, trying to pretend that it was just a bad dream. But deep down, we all knew the truth. The woods weren't ours anymore. They belonged to something else, something ancient, something that watched us from the shadows, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting campers to wander too deep into their territory. And as I sit here now, writing this down, I can't help but wonder, how many others have seen those eyes? How many others never made it out of those woods? All I know is this: I'll never go back. Because those creatures, whatever they were, they're still out there, waiting.